Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. Hope you're staying safe and healthy. Hopefully this is the last video that we have to do because next week we are planning on meeting back together at the church building, being able to worship with one another again for the first time in a long time. And I am very excited for that, and I know a lot of you are as well. So we will be back together next Sunday, July 5th, in the building. Of course, we're asking everyone to wear masks and use hand sanitizer, wash hands, and please sit distant from other people that are not in your house, and among many other things that we're doing to make sure that we are meeting together safely. But we are very excited that we will be meeting back together, and I hope you're as excited as I am to be able to do that. So this morning, or this today, we're going to wrap up our look at the study of Ephesians. We've looked at this letter that Paul wrote to the people in Ephesus, and how it talks about God's purposes for us, for as a church, the purposes that He has said about it from the very beginning, and what do they mean to us, and how do we fulfill those purposes that God has for us. Last week we looked at chapter 3 of Ephesians, and just a quick recap of those things is one of the questions that we asked was, how can we live for God? And Paul says that we live better for God. We can live better when we allow Christ to dwell in our hearts, and that means to live there. It's not a quick vacation or a little stay over. It's taking up residence within our hearts. And when we do that, we will see God working through us, and we will see Him working through us in really unimaginable ways. And we can only do that with God working through us. This week we're going to again wrap up, and there's 3 chapters left, 4, 5, and 6. And so we're going to look at little bits of each of the chapters. Now there's going to be more to the chapters that we aren't going to look at, so I really encourage you to go through and read those on your own, in your own study time. But we're going to look at little bits and pieces of chapters 4, 5, and 6. And if we look at chapters 1 through 3, as we have, those first 3 chapters of Ephesians really kind of talk about doctrine, the why and the how that we are saved. What did God do for us? Why did He do that for us? And we see that it was God's plan from the very beginning. And so really the first 3 chapters in this letter talk about really the doctrine behind us being saved and reconciled to God. And chapters 4 through 6 talk more about our duty. What do we do in response to that? What do we do now that we are saved through Christ? And so we're going to look at those things, a few of those things today. We're going to start in chapter 4. We're going to look at verses 1 through 6. So Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. And it says, "As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, and through all, and in all." So we see here, one of our duties is to be united with one another. We are called to be united to one another. And really this should come from an internal desire. Should be something that we want to do because of our love for one another. It should not be something that we get from external pressure, because that becomes uniformity and not unity. And so this is an internal thing that we want. When we enter into our life with Christ, we want to be united with other Christians and other members of the body. And so how can we be united? What can we do to have this unity with one another? There's really 5 characteristics I want to look at in these few verses that help us with that unity. The first characteristic that we need to have is we need to be humble. We need to be humble. And what that really means is We need to put Christ first. He comes first in our lives. And then we need to put others second, ahead of us. And finally, we are last. And so in my life, I am last. I'm thinking about others before myself. I'm thinking about Christ above myself. And that's what it means to live in humility. Really, it's the thought of it's not about me. If I'm going to be humble, it's not about me. And I think a lot of times, especially in our culture and the way things are in the world around us, we are always told, no, it is about you, and it's what you want, and you live the way you want to live, and don't let anybody tell you any differently. But if we're going to live humbly and live with humility, it's not about us. It's not about me. It's about what am I doing for others? Am I worrying about what others have going on in their lives? Am I worried about how they're feeling? Am I worried about, am I living for Christ above myself? Am I living for God daily and not just for me? And so the first thing that we can do to be united and live in unity is to put others ahead of ourselves. And then when everybody is putting everybody else ahead of themselves, then we can have unity. The second characteristic that we see here is gentleness. We need to be gentle. Now, a lot of people will equate this to weakness, right? If you're gentle, then you're weak, but that's not what it means. In fact, the Greek talks about this really being power under control. It talks about like a broken horse. Horses are very powerful, even if you've broken them to be able to ride them, but they are under control. And so gentleness is really us having power, but keeping it under control. And you stay under control and you don't let emotions rule you. A lot of times our emotions kind of bubble up, and those are the things that we allow to escape us. Those are the things that we allow to kind of rule what we do sometimes as we lean on those emotions. But being gentle means that we are staying under control. When things happen, we are controlled, and we don't let those emotions bubble over. We don't let those emotions rule over us. The third characteristic that we see here in these verses is patience. Patience. And really, that's the ability to endure discomfort without fighting back. The way I look at patience a lot of times is the ability to see the bigger picture. While something might be a little annoying at the time, there's a bigger picture out there, and I always think to myself, is this something worth getting worked up over or not? One of the things that I think about recently is, the wearing of masks everywhere. I just was on a flight to Texas and then a flight back, and had to wear a mask the whole time. I was in the airport and on the airplane and everything else, so I was wearing a mask for several hours. And it was inconvenient at times. There were a few times I tried to eat a snack and forgot I had a mask on and put it into the mask. But there were other times where it got itchy. But really, the way that I dealt with it is looking at the big picture, right? I'm protecting myself from a virus, and I'm protecting others around me when I wear a mask. And so the bigger picture was more important than the discomfort that the mask might have caused. And a lot of times with patience, we sometimes forget what the big picture is when we become impatient. It's something that's annoying us or something that we don't like, and it causes us to react. When we look at unity and how we can be united with one another, if we let little things cause us to react all the time and we aren't patient with one another, we're not going to have that unity. So we need to look at the big picture and think, is this something that I need to get worked up over? The fourth characteristic that Paul talked about here is effort. Effort, he says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit. And the effort in the Greek, the way that it is used is that it's a continual working. It's something that you have to continue to do. You never stop. And so Paul's saying here that we need to continue working on our unity, and that's not something that's ever going to be completed. It's something we're going to work on all the time. It's kind of like a marriage, right? Where if you want to have a good marriage, you're going to continue to work on your love for one another. It's not just a Well, we said I do at the altar. Isn't that good enough? No, it's something that you have to, excuse me, it's something that you have to continue to work on consistently and continually, and so you can have a good marriage. The same way with unity, we have to continually work on unity and never stop working on it, because usually whenever you think you're done, that's when something bad happens, or that's when Satan steps in and says, well, I'll show you how you're not. And so we need to continue to work on our unity. And the last characteristic that we see here in these first verses of chapter 4 is peace. We need to have peace in order to have unity. And really that's peace within ourselves. It's not so much peace within the people, which, I mean, that is important, but in order to have peace with the people around us, we need to have peace within ourselves. And if we can't have that peace within ourselves, how can we expect to have peace with people around us? And that means we need to have peace with God within ourselves. Because when we're at peace with God, then we can be at peace with other people. And when we know that there is a peace within us, then there can be peace and unity with the people around us. And then verses 4 through 6 show how we are united. And I'll read those again. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. Well, how are we united? It's because we have one God. We have one Savior. We have one Spirit. We have one hope. And those are the things that are going to unite us. But we need to have these other characteristics: the humility, the gentleness, the patience, the effort, the peace, in order for these unifying factors to work. And so we will admit, yes, we are one Spirit. We all worship one God. We have one Savior. But if we aren't these other things to one another, unity is going to be very difficult. We're going to move on to chapter 5, and we're going to look at verses 1 and 2. And they say, "Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the ways of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." So we see here our duty is to walk in love. And the word follow here at the very beginning is the word for mimic. It's the Greek word for mimic. It says we need to do as God did when he showed love to us. And that really meant he gave everything for us. And so when we are showing love to the people around us, we are mimicking God and saying, I'm willing to give everything because I want to love you. And so we need to mimic God by showing his love to the people around us. And we do that as dearly loved children. And when I think of children and mimicking, I think about where our son Logan is, and he mimics a lot of things. We have to be kind of careful what we say and what we do, because he follows everything that we do and say. You know, it's kind of funny. We'll be talking, and in a different room, he'll start repeating what we say. Now, luckily, it's mostly we're talking about things that he's done, during the day, so he already knows about it. But it kind of makes you think for a second. Whoa, he's watching everything that we do. He's listening to everything that we say, and he mimics those things. He'll see us do something, and he tries to do it himself. And that's the way children learn, right? That children learn by watching their parents and listening to their parents and learning from them, and by mimicking, saying, well, this is what mommy and daddy do, so I'm going to do it as well. Well, that's how we need to be with God in showing love. We are supposed to follow God or mimic God as a child. But then we're also loved children. We do so as loved children. And it's important to remember that we are dearly loved, because our response should be to love God the way that he has loved us. And we love God back by the way that we live. And so he shows love to us, and we want to show our love back to him, and we do that by the way that we live. And when I think about this, I think about whenever I was a child, and one of the worst things that could happen to me was to know that I had disappointed my parents. They loved me very much, and so I loved them back, and obviously I didn't always do things right all the time. I messed up. I made mistakes. But whenever I found out that I had disappointed my parents, it hurt me. It hurt me badly because the way that I lived had hurt them in some way. And so I think of that whenever I think of loving God back. And the way that we show our love to God is by living the way He wants us to live and doing the things that He wants us to do. And so we show that love to Him because He loved us first. And we need to remember that we are dearly loved because He paid a great price because of that love. He showed His love to us by sending His Son to die for us. That is a major price to pay. And so that's how we know that He means it, right? He really, really loves us. And to show that, He gave us His Son so that we can be with Him. And so we need to remember that we are loved, and He showed us that love, and He means it. And so our response, our duty is to walk in that same love and show other people that love and live the way that He has asked us so we can love Him back. Now we're going to skip on to chapter 6. We're going to go down to chapter 6 and start in verse 10. We're going to read verses 10 through 12. And they say this: "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." So to me, our duty here is to know who our enemy is. Know who our enemy really is. We did a Wednesday night / Sunday night series on this not too long ago. But we need to know who our enemy is. And our enemy in our battle is against the spiritual forces of evil. It's against Satan and his forces. I think we tend to put our focus on the flesh and blood enemies, the ones that Paul says we don't need to worry about those. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual enemies. But we tend to put our focus a lot of times on those flesh and blood enemies, people that we disagree with, whether it be politically or doctrinally or just personal beliefs. Those are the ones that we tend to put our focus on and say, I'm going to fight you, and I'm going to put all my effort into defeating you. When Paul says we need to focus on the spiritual battle, not the battle of flesh and blood. Because really we need to be seeking unity through Christ with those people, even if we disagree with them. Right? That's what he talked about in the previous chapters, is we need to have unity. And so we need to seek unity with those people and not see them as enemies. And of course we always need to teach the truth in love when we seek that unity. But when we focus on those enemies of flesh and blood, that takes our focus off of Satan and how he is working in our lives. And so when we take our focus off of him, that's what he wants, because then he gets to work unencumbered and not have to worry about us, and he can work on our lives and how he can separate us from God. And so we need to take our focus off of the flesh and blood things and put that onto Satan and how he's working in our lives, and focus on him and battling him and not any of this other stuff. And that's what Paul is talking about here, is we need to not worry about the struggles of flesh and blood, but know who our real enemy is. And when we know who our real enemy is, then we can be better prepared to fight this battle that we are in. And so to wrap up today and kind of wrap up our study of Ephesians, I just want us to think about a few things this week. We all have purposes to fulfill. We have purposes to fulfill as individuals. We have purposes to fulfill as a church. And the things that I want us to think about this week are these three things. First, we need to be united with one another. That means we need to be humble, and we need to be willing to put others first. And I think this is one of the things that's going to come up over the next few weeks as we meet back together. With all the things that we are asking people to do, I know it's not always comfortable. I know it's not always the things that we want to do. But we need to be humble and put others before ourselves. You know, you might not want to wear a mask. You might want to go up and give hugs and handshakes and all of those things, but that is not what we need to do right now. That is not how we're going to be able to take care of one another right now. And so when we come back, we need to have this unity, this sense of unity, and the thought of it's not about me and it's not about what I want, but it's what's best for everybody around me. And so as we think this next week, as we are coming back to meet with one another, we remember that we need to be united with one another, and united in all these things, these precautions that we are um, these precautions that we are taking is part of it. The second thing to think about this week is walk in love. We need to walk in love. We need to mimic God's love for us, mimic God's love as a child mimics his parents. You know, as we go throughout this week, we think, what would God do in this situation? How would God love the people around me? And we mimic that love for them. And the last thing to think about is know who our real enemy is. Let's not focus on the things of the flesh and blood, but let's focus on that spiritual enemy, the one who is trying to separate us from God. Focus on defeating Satan and not all these other things, all the things going on around us, especially when it comes to the, you know, this is my personal preference versus your personal preference, so I don't like you, or, you know, you believe things a little bit differently than me, so we're just not going to agree on these things, and so I'm not going to like you because of that, or especially in these times, you know, I disagree with you politically, and so I'm going to put all my effort into showing you why you were wrong. Let's not focus on those things, but let's focus on who our real enemy is, and that is Satan. He's trying to separate us from God. And there are other purposes, there are other duties that are mentioned in these three chapters, chapters 4 through 6 of Ephesians. And again, I really encourage you to go back and read through those yourself and see what purposes God has for us. So I hope to see you this next week as we're meeting back in person. If you're unable to, we're still going to try to find a way to do some sort of video thing that we can all participate. But I'm excited to meet back in person. I hope you are as well. Please continue to pray for this transition again as we meet back. Pray for the safety of everybody. And we'll be praying for those who aren't able to make it yet. But hope to see you all soon. Thank you.